Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Linda Schenk and I'm the Executive Officer of Wine Communicators Australia. The Australian Government $50 million export and regional wine support package seeks to transform the Australian grape and wine industry by driving demand for wine exports and showcasing Australia's wine tourism to the world. One of the aims of the package is to build the capability and capacity of small and medium-sized businesses to capture export and tourism opportunities, particularly in China and the United States of America. Thank you for joining us today for our special Wine Export Grant webinar, held in conjunction with Wine Australia. It's with great pleasure that I introduce you to our speakers today, Justin Ross. Justin is the Grant Program Manager, and Felicity England, the Grant Manager for the $50 million package. Should you have any questions throughout this webinar, down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a questions button. Feel free to type them in and we will be asking those questions of the panel, speakers after they finish their section. As always, we'll be recording this session and we'll provide you with a link to rewatch this presentation at your leisure, and it will be available on our website for watching at any time. Look, that's enough from me. I'll pass you over now to Justin.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you very much for joining us today. Felicity and I would spend the next 20 minutes or so going through a pre-prepared presentation on the Wine Export Grant Program, and then we have set aside the remainder of the time to answer any questions or queries that you might have in regards to the program. Having said that, there will be an opportunity once I have finished with the initial part of the presentation for questions before I hand over to Felicity. Hopefully on your screen you can see an overview of the way today will work. Just by way of an explanation, Felicity and I are the administrators of the program only. We're here today to clarify the rules around the program but not interpret them. So if you do have any questions or queries regarding your personal circumstances in the program, we suggest that you do get professional advice. We, as we said, are the administrators. We can explain the rules, but if you do have particular things in regards to your circumstance, you may need to consider talking to your professional advisors. The reason that we're doing the webinar is that we've been running the program now since the 2nd of January. We have had a number of applications and we are currently processing a number of applications. And the sad fact of the matter is that there is a relatively high, or quite a high, rate of failure of applications to gain initial approval. By that I mean that they're being submitted and they're being assessed by our assessors, which is Felicity and I, and that in a very large majority of cases they are having to be resent back for clarification or information. And we thought that having a webinar of this nature today would go a long way to at least clarifying some of the areas and providing potential applicants with the opportunity to make sure that their applications were accurate at the first time and had the maximum opportunity to getting processed and recommended for payment. We do recommend that you spend a little bit more time on the applications because that will result in a better outcome for your application. And having said that, it is your responsibility to provide accurate, legible evidence and information. Don't rely on us to interpret it all. And I would strongly recommend that your key reference with everything to do with this program is the Wine Export Grant Guidelines document, which is available on the Wine Australia website, along with quite a detailed frequently asked question list, and more recently we've also put up a checklist for you to go through and make sure that you've addressed all of those items on the checklist before you submit your application. As I explained, I will give the overview, and then Felicity will go through some of the specific details that are listed in the agenda, if you like. We would, as we say, we would like to try to answer your questions today, but if there are any complex questions that may need to be taken on notice, and we'll respond to you in writing. So I'll move on to just a quick overview of the wine export grants. I'm sure all of you would already be aware of this, but I just want to re-emphasise the program, and then I will hand it over to my colleague, Felicity. So the wine export grant is a reimbursement grant for up to 50% of eligible export promotion expenses that have been incurred on or after the 1st of January 2018. The program is $1 million, and it closes on May 2020, or on the expiration of funds, whichever comes first. The nature of this is a reimbursement, so you need to have incurred the eligible expenses before lodging your application. We have had a number of applications seeking pre-approval. They are not eligible. It is only after the costs have been incurred that you can lodge your application. The program's capped at $1 million, and it is going to be accessed on a first come, first served basis. And for those of you who are monitoring the Wine Australia tally on our website, you'll notice that there are already been some grants paid. The aim of the program is to reduce the transaction costs of exporting for wine exporters to China and the USA markets by allowing eligible Australian wine producers to lodge one claim for the reimbursement of up to 50% of expenditure on specific export promotion activities undertaken on or after the 1st of January this year. You can claim the costs of a single promotional trip to China, Hong Kong, Macau, or the US. And it includes 50% of airfares for each flight taken up to a maximum of $2,500 Australian, taxi fares, departure taxes, visas. There is an allowance of $350 per day for on-ground costs, and that can include vehicle hire, phone expenses, meals, laundry, taxi, hospitality costs, accommodation, and interpreter services. But it is capped for a maximum of 14 days in total. You can claim the costs of providing free samples up to $2,500, including freight. You can claim the costs of participating in trade fairs, seminars, and in-store promotion costs directly relating to participating and promoting your product in an international trade fair, seminar, international forum, or private exhibition that is based in China, Hong Kong, Macau, or the United States of America. You can also claim the costs of marketing and advertising collateral that is tailored for the China or US market. The way your application is to be lodged is via the online form that is available on the Wine Australia website. If you go to the grants program page, you will find the guidelines, application forms, and the frequently asked questions. Once you've completed and lodged your application, it'll be assessed against the criteria, which is whether you're an eligible organisation and whether their eligible expenses are actually being claimed. Wine Australia may request additional information to assess that eligibility. And once it is assessed by Wine Australia staff as being eligible, the recommended grant amount will be advised to the Wine Australia Chief Executive for approval. If your application is not deemed to be eligible, you'll be advised by letter including the reasons why. Once it's approved by Wine Australia, you'll receive a letter of offer for the grant, and it's a matter of accepting that letter of offer, and we will process the payment, and it'll be a single payment. Eligible Australian wine producers will only be able to make one successful application. If you do have an unsuccessful application, you are able to lodge another one. Wine Australia will be publishing information about the awarded grants on the Wine Australia website, including the name of the person or the entity, the project title and the purpose and the amount of funding. And as I said, we are keeping an up-to-date tally of the grant funds on the Wine Australia website to enable you to make informed business decisions as when and how much you may wish to lodge your grant application. So that's an overview of the program. If you do have any questions, we will take general questions now before I hand over to Felicity to go through some of the specific points and issues that we want to make today. Thank you.
So Justin, there is a question that's come through. Who is the best person to contact regarding any professional questions? Right. So we're working on the assumption that businesses will have a accountant or a legal firm that will be providing advice. If you don't, then there are professional or grant advisors that certainly provide advice for Austrade's Export Market and Development Grant Scheme that you may wish to see, and I think you can find those quite easily on the internet or in the yellow pages. Here we go. We've got another one just come through. Can you give any examples, not names, of course, of what may have made an application submitted after travel unsuccessful?
Okay, so it's a good question, and it's why we're here today, is to address these things. But one example is using something like a BAS statement as evidence for expenses being incurred.
Great. There's no other questions that look like they've come through now, Justin, so we'll pass it over to Felicity, although there is a question that's just come through. I told you it takes a little while to get through sometimes, so maybe you or Felicity can answer this one while you're changing over. Do previous EMDG grant payments affect the eligibility of the new grant?
No, if you have previously participated in the EMDG scheme, you're still eligible to apply for a wine export grant. However, you can't apply for a wine export grant for the same expenses that may be part of an EMDG scheme application.
Great, thanks Felicity. And there's another one for you, Can an application include 2 trips?
So the intention of the wine export grant is that it is a reimbursement program for a single promotional trip. So the intention is that there is only one trip from Australia and return that would be an eligible reimbursement.
Okay, good. They're coming through thick and fast now. Is the monetary tally on the Wine Australia website the figure committed only, or is there a tally that has been applied for the pending approvals?
No, the tally on the Wine Australia website is only the amounts that have presently been committed. In terms of the applications that have been received, we have observed that some applicants are claiming for quantums that are ineligible. So we don't think that there's an appropriate way of reporting the amount of monies that have been applied for, because that would potentially misrepresent the capacity of people to apply for the grant.
Can you claim a trip to the US and China in the same application but on at different times?
You could claim for a trip to China and the US so long as the trip was part of one contiguous journey, that is a single promotional trip. If you were doing 2 marketing promotional trips that were entirely separate and distinct, where you were returning to Australia in between those 2 travel events, then you would need to choose which one was going to be the subject of your application.
Okay, and what are the business ownership requirements to be eligible?
So in order to be eligible for the wine export grant, and that was actually coming to the first slide that I was going to present to you, you need to be an eligible Australian wine producer. In terms of applying for the grant, it means that the grant application and the reimbursement is the entitlement of the wine producer, and the guidelines provide quite a specific definition of what an eligible Australian wine producer is for the purposes of the grant. The definition of wine has to be contiguous with the definition that is in the Wine Australia Act, and that's set out in the guidelines. And the definition of producer is defined by the WET taxation, that's a new tax system, wine equalisation tax. If you do need advice about whether you are eligible to claim, then we do recommend that you seek professional advice, and we'd expect that your accountant would be able to assist you with that.
That's it. You can continue on.
Excellent. So that question has taken me through the slide that I'm displaying to you now. That's the key elements of what you need to be in order to be an eligible applicant for the Wine Export Grant Program. There are some additional eligibility requirements that apply. That is that as a wine producer, your aggregated turnover needs to be less than $20 million in the financial year immediately preceding your claim. And in that $20 million turnover, you also need to have an export turnover of less than $5 million. So you can see the program is intended to be accessed by small to medium producers in the market. In terms of the promotional visit that you might be applying for, there is a list of the eligible destinations contained within the grant guidelines. Those are China, Hong Kong, Macau, and the United States of America. Now, as one of those questions that we just took before indicated, you can include multiple eligible destinations, but it does need to be one continuous trip. It's also important that your trip has been completed before you apply for the wine export grant reimbursement. However, you can start your application before you leave on your trip. You can go to the apply button, register with the application portal, and do your preliminary materials, upload any of the supporting documents that you have available to you at that time. Just bear in mind that there will be documents that you will still need to complete and upload when you return. One of the key elements that we have found some difficulty with in the application process for those who have already applied has been the completion of the Statutory Declaration. The Stat Dec is a key and important document in relation to your application, and bear in mind that it is a legal document. When you sign a Stat Dec, it is the equivalent to giving evidence in court. Shortly, I'll show you the document and highlight the critical areas that need to be completed, but just as a quick summary, the important information that needs to be completed on that document includes the name, address, occupation of the declarant, and the capacity of the person who is making the declaration. When you look at the document in a moment, you'll see that at the very bottom of the document, it describes the capacity in which the person must be declaring the truth of the matters in relation to the application. And there are specific roles that need to undertake that task on behalf of the wine producer. You also need to ensure that the witness before whom you're signing your Stat Dec completes their relevant authority, that is, the capacity in which they are able to witness your statutory declaration. We have found that a couple of applications that have come through have been witnessed by people who haven't completed in what capacity or with what authority they're able to take your statutory declaration. We'll just show you the Stat Dec document, which is available on the Wine Australia website now. And what we've got there highlighted for you, you can see at the top of the document there, the place where you need to handwrite in the full name, address, occupation and capacity of the person who's signing the declaration. And if we scroll down through the document, you can see at point 3 there, the place where you would be signing the document. And below that, the section at which the witness would be inputting their name and address and the qualification under which they are able to witness your declaration. An important point to highlight, which is contained at the bottom of that document, is that the declaration must be made by the Managing Director, the Chief Executive Officer, the Registered Company Secretary, or a Director of the company. It may be that if the company has a Chief Financial Officer, that person could sign the declaration. And if you have an alternative business structure, such that you run your business through a partnership or you're a sole trader, then that person would be able to sign the declaration on behalf of the producer. The next part that I wanted to speak to you about was just the evidence that you need to submit in support of your claim when you're seeking reimbursement of your travel and other costs. There are a number of items of evidence that are critically important to a number of elements of your claim, in particular airfares, departure taxes, and the daily allowance. In support of those claims, it's really important that you include any itineraries that you have from your travel agent or evidence of the arrangements that you have booked yourself through the internet, the boarding passes for both leaving Australia and returning to Australia, including any in-country travel that you're doing that evidence the days and ideally times on which you travelled. If you have been using boarding passes through an electronic means, such as on your iPhone or other smartphone, then it may be that you can obtain a JPEG image of that boarding pass, or alternatively, another option might be to obtain a letter from your airline to evidence that you travelled on those dates and times. There is variability in the detail of the airfare charges or departure taxes that you might find on your itinerary. So I'd recommend, if you have the opportunity, to have a conversation with your travel agent to see if they can give you some itemised detail about those costs, and that can be submitted with your claim. Bear in mind that your claim for reimbursement will be assessed based on the documentation that you have provided. When it comes to claiming airfares, the operation of the grant guidelines does enable a claim of up to $2,500 for reimbursement of 50% of the value of each flight taken. So if your evidence supports it, then you may in fact be able to claim reimbursement for both your departure flight as well as your returning flight, but the evidence will need to support the value of each of those legs of your travel. Another important item is the departure taxes. We have seen claims coming through where the evidence doesn't support a claim for a departure tax separate and distinct to the airfare. If you're looking for reimbursement of your departure tax, then we will need some evidence that describes what those departure taxes are. The reason being that any Australian departure taxes are not eligible for reimbursement under the program. Another element which needs a receipt or other evidence as to the expense is for any visas. We do know that you are likely to require a visa to travel to many of these destinations and perform and promote business activities, but we do need evidence of those expenses having been incurred in order for that item to be reimbursed. If you have any expenses that are eligible for reimbursement which have been incurred in a foreign currency, then we do need you to provide evidence of the exchange rate for the date that you have incurred that expense. It's important in your claim that you provide the evidence which supports the claim in the foreign currency amount, but that you also then convert that foreign currency amount into Australian dollars, and that you give us at the time of your claim evidence of what currency exchange rate has been used to convert those foreign currency expenses into Australian dollars. Just some key tips in relation to submitting your claim and it hopefully being successful on the first assessment. Ensure that your evidentiary documents are in English. If you have airfares or promotional activity expenses which have been undertaken and incurred in a foreign country. Ensure that your claim for airfares and for any amount of those airfares is supported on the evidence, and that departure taxes aren't rolled into that figure because of the treatment of Australian departure taxes as described by the guidelines. If you can claim your departure taxes separately, then you're certainly able to claim reimbursement for those departure taxes that are incurred overseas. It's just that the evidence will need to support the quantum of that claim. Please also ensure that there's an itinerary naming each designated representative. As you might ascertain from the guidelines, it is possible for a claim for reimbursement of expenses to be made for more than one designated representative for each producer. However, there does need to be supporting documentation of the same standard for one as there are for all those others that may be travelling in support of that promotional activity. Another issue that has occurred, and it has only occurred on a couple of occasions, but is where there have been expenses incurred by producers who have either shared expenses or by a producer who has received a bill in the name of their brand. In that case, if you have an expense that has a different biller name to the name of your wine company, your eligible producer, you'll need to provide us with supporting evidence to demonstrate that this is a valid expense for the producer that is making the claim. Just there, we're showing you a screenshot of the grants page on the Wine Australia website. If you go to www.wineaustralia.com, go to the 50 million package page and drill down on the Wine Export Grants 2B section. There's a significant amount of information available for you on that website. You can see a number of hyperlinks on that page that will take you to extra information, including the guidelines, the Statutory Declaration, the 2 addenda that have been issued in relation to the guidelines, and our frequently asked questions. We certainly recommend that you review those materials before you proceed to submit your application. So thank you for your time, and we're happy to take any questions of a general nature. And if you do have any particularly technical questions, it may be that we will take those offline and respond to you after we've completed the webinar today.
Great, thanks Felicity. Yes, there is a question or two here, and I'm sure people are typing frantically. It is. The question is, can there be more than one person that is eligible? For example, a winemaker and a marketer, or a winemaker and a sales manager?
Yes, certainly each claim can include multiple designated representatives for a wine producer.
The other question was, is a general manager a qualified or acceptable position for the application submission?
So the application could be submitted by the general manager or by anyone else who can offer administrative assistance in your office, but the statutory declaration does need to be made by one of those designated officers on behalf of your business.
Great. It doesn't look like there's any other questions coming through, so I might wrap up unless people are frantically typing. So if they do come through, I'll stop and ask the questions. Just for everyone's knowledge, this recording will be sent to you tomorrow. So if you're interested in going back on the questions, please just fast forward to where it's at. Here we go. Here's another one. Is the travel claim amount for flights capped per person or per claim?
The amount of claim for flights is capped per flight claimed. There is a total cap in terms of an application for each eligible producer of $25,000.
Excellent. And can you apply for costs of trade dinners or masterclasses?
That's a question that may have to turn on the individual facts of each claim, but if the activity you're undertaking is one of the eligible promotional activities, then it may be that could be approved as an eligible expense.
Great. Well, I've got a question for you. I was wondering if you could just wrap up maybe with 5 key points.
I guess the key factors to bear in mind, and in order to ensure that your claim goes through the first time that you submit, would be to ensure that you've completed the statutory declaration correctly and accurately, ensure that each expense that you are seeking reimbursement for is supported by evidence, ensure that the evidence is clear and legible so that it can be assessed readily within Australia, ensure that your itinerary details insofar as possible the quantum of each of the expenses that are eligible for claim, including airfares and departure taxes, and also ensure that you haven't included anything that would be ineligible to claim, and if you can, that you do calculate the eligible amount for each expense, bearing in mind that the system enables you to represent the 50% amount for each expense that you're claiming.
I think we've actually got, I'm sorry, it's a bit all over the place at the moment, but we keep getting questions coming in and it takes a little while for them to come through, obviously, while people are typing. There's one question here, is the eligibility promotional activity under guidelines? Under your guidelines, I'm guessing.
Yes, so the guidelines do provide a description of an eligible promotional activity. The types of promotional activities that are described within the guidelines are trade fairs, seminars, and in-store promotions. That can include an international trade fair, seminar, an international forum, or a private exhibition, so long as it is in one of the eligible destinations.
Great. One of the questions came through actually on an email. Is there any capacity to claim export grant funds if you are opening an export arrangement in Singapore?
Unfortunately for this program, the eligible destinations are limited to China, Hong Kong, Macau, and the United States. If there are people online who are interested in applying for support for export promotion activities in other destinations, then we recommend that they look at the EMDG scheme, that's the Export Market Development Scheme, which is run by Austrade.
Excellent, thank you. Look, I think we will wrap up there because there's no more questions that have come through. Thank you so much to Justin and Felicity for your excellent information today. Obviously, there's a lot of interest. We had lots of questions, which is awesome. Thank you also to everybody who participated today. As I mentioned before, we will be sending through a link to the presentation where you can view it again, plus it'll be on the WCA website. You can forward the link on to anybody that you like who may be interested in this information. I'm getting a message here. If you have any questions, Felicity's just writing down the email address for me. It is grants@wineaustralia.com. So that was grants@wineaustralia.com if you have any questions, and they'll be answered by one of the team. Yes, thank you again for coming. Our next webinar will be held on the 12th of June. We will be hearing from Trish Barry from Mastermind Consulting, who will be talking to us about reevaluating the role of digital and social media in your marketing mix. So until then, we hope you have a great month. If you're in Adelaide, we hope you stay warm, and bye for now.